Wes and Ted's
Amie's.
Excellent Conversation, a podcast about teaching, learning, and anything else that pops into Wes and Ted's
Amie's.
heads.
Good morning, Wes.
Well, hello, Amie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Shall we introduce you to our listeners? Do you suppose?
I would love to. I would love to introduce myself, and you can fill in the gaps. We used to introduce each other, and that's always fun.
Forgot about that. It's been a long time. There have been some changes.
Yeah. Oh yes, there have been changes. So hi everyone. I am Amie Dorsey, and I'm the founder of Tutor Ted Inc. I started transitioning internally, personally, on June 8th of 2020, and medically on March 7th of 2021. And it is now January 9th, 2023. So coming up on finishing the second year of my medical transition. And it's been like a really amazing, very, very difficult, very beautiful journey. Yeah, it's a funny thing to own a business named after your dead name. There's been a lot of like, wringing of hands around what to do with that, what to do with a business named after the old version of yourself. I'm back and still mostly the same person I was. Quite a bit prettier, I believe. I think that's almost subjective. I mean, I know that like, aesthetics are subjective, but like, I'm going to call it, I'm prettier now. But a lot of things have not changed at all. Like I'm still like, caffeine addict. I'm still someone who likes to work with students and, try to make the world a better place through personal interaction, and who loves life and recognizes the value of friendship, like with my friend Wes Carroll. Take it away, Wes.
Outstanding. So I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll say a couple things about you, if I may, Amie. Amie and I are both tutors, of course. I specialize in helping bright students reach their potential, primarily through STEM and sort of metacognition. And Amie, I'll say about this last year plus that it's been really interesting to me to see how, from the sidelines, how difficult the change has been for you. I think just sort of socially, right, as a culture, like what it represents for the people around you, and how much of a nothing burger it feels like from the outside now. You know what I mean? Like you look different, but you don't look like you're not you. If anything, I'd say that you're every bit as much or more you than you were before. And I mean, that's a thing that we've talked about offline, what is identity and so on. And I find
that's important, by the way. I think that's really important, anyway, carry on.
No, I think I think that's probably going to be something that we're going to wind up talking about, because identity is a thing that affects our students, in a very profound way, because they're sort of making their way in the world. And it's interesting to watch students become the adult they're going to become. And I've noticed that process has really rhymed in ways I didn't expect, with my observation of you becoming the person on the outside that you have been on the inside. Which is interesting because, there's some aspects of it that, even close friends of yours, I think, haven't been aware of. And yet in watching it come to fruition, like I say, it's nothing burger. It's like, oh yeah, that kind of clicks. That makes sense to me. I look at before and after pictures of you and it's like, wow, the differences are really striking. But like, as I look at you now, it's like, yeah, I remember you as you, which I find, really interesting.
Thank you so much. And I am me. And the reason I think that's important is just that challenging as this is, it is becoming myself, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that makes this whole process so much easier, you know what I mean? It's a point of orientation that, like, I am who I am.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been hard because there's a lot of disruption, and there is a major impact socially, you know, like, you know, on the one hand, and I get a lot of advice from people at times, like, well, just, you know, I'll complain about going to the grocery store and having people, you know, stare at me, which they don't really do anymore, which is really
Mm-hmm.
nice.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do, and we could talk about that. But um, interacting in the world and just being yourself is like such a gift, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And when I have those moments when I'm just like, you know, I'm me, Amie, in the world, and no one cares, right? No one cares.
Yeah, you're not as important a character in anyone else's drama as you are in your own.
I don't need to be, you know what I mean? I want to, like, if I'm going to stand out, I want to stand out for like the work that I do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, the person that I am, the interactions that I have, rather than being some like sort of like circus freak, you know? But you know, the physical transition has been, you know, a day-to-day thing. You know, it evolves moment to moment. The sort of like spiritual transition kind of happened instantaneously, and really kind of happened 40 years ago, you know. You know, where so that, you know, the day I decided that I was going to be Amie every day full time, do not call me anything else, was just kind of like, it was a line in the sand, in that, like, you can draw a line in the sand really easily, you know what I mean? You pick your spot, and you're like, now's the moment, now I'm Amie, deal with it, you know. So yeah, I mean, I could talk till sunset about this, but I won't, because I'm nice. But yeah. Anyway, hello everybody.
Yes,
I'm
indeed.
Amie. That's
So one of the things that I thought might be interesting to riff on a bit is that, well, let me see if I can frame this without going completely off the rails. So I grew up in a very socially conservative environment, and it was sufficiently socially conservative and far enough in the past that that being gay carried stigma. Okay.
Sure.
And I remember, you know, at various points in my life when that construct got sort of undone for me in such a way that it just, like, it's just not well, in part because of a bunch of sort of internal transitions, and also because, you know, I've married a person that I'm in an exclusive relationship with, and so I'm not looking for that kind of companion, you know, for all these different reasons. It just doesn't, I just don't care like, it doesn't register for me and people around me. It's like, you know, how many gay friends do you have? I don't care. Like, it's just not a thing, right? And I expected your transition to kind of put me back in that sense of like, oh, there's this big thing going on around me. And I've been very surprised to find that, like, oh yeah, no, that wasn't consequential. The reason I'm bringing it up is that I do find that the transition that students make entering full adulthood, specifically going through high school, from middle school to college, let's say, okay, still feels very consequential to our culture. And the reason I've been thinking about it, independent of our conversations, is that it occurs to me that part of what that transition is about is intellectual development. And I've come to realize that I have a certain, you know, good faith aversion to the idea that, you know, that you develop so much intellectually in those years, because the implication is that you aren't developing intellectually at all the other times.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Okay. And what I found is that in the last couple of years, I mean, obviously, you know, COVID-19 has made this a lot more acute. but I've been sort of a lot more aware of my intellectual development or lack thereof at different phases of my life. And it's been interesting to me that because I'm trying to help people with the sort of culturally accepted time for vast intellectual development, I've really been buried in it. And as a result, like, I've gotten some of it by osmosis, right? I've been more mindful about my own development, right, than I might otherwise be.
Good.
Yeah, but
useful.
For sure. But it really strikes me that the way it's expected for teenagers is not expected across all age ranges, is not expected across all cultures, right? There are certain certain careers in which, you're expected to, read books and journal and all that kind of good stuff. But by and large, it's like, yeah, we expect you to become an adult, and like your development is kind of on you. And I find that kind of weird, as I take a step back.
What would you, how would you like it to look? You know what I mean? Like, what would be sort of like an optimal, like, social model for like ongoing development and support for development in those critical phases? That's a meaty ass question right there.
Yeah, it's really good. Well, I tell you what, I'll swing and possibly whiff, and then let me bounce it over to you. Yeah.
Great.
So I can't help but see this through the framework of what I'll call the two brains. There's a bunch of different ways you can slice and dice this, but I just want to talk about the sort of the rational cognitive brain versus the limbic emotional, impulse brain, whatever. Because there's such a gulf between, for example, how much exercise I know I should be doing and how much exercise I actually get, right? There's always that, that thing. And I also, I can't quite put my finger on it, but I have the sense that treating us all as worker bees in an economy or humans in a society, somehow that mirrors this intellectual emotional divide. I can't quite put my finger on it, but it feels like the tensions between those two different dichotomies are similar. And so I feel like in a world that did a better job of supporting this sort of development, we would not only recognize that intellectual development happens throughout your life, right? In fits and starts, right? Maybe not at a constant rate, but still.
Sure. Yeah.
But also that there's like this natural tension between, okay, what do you do for a living economy and who are you in your community socially, right? And that, that tension also needs to be relieved or released a little bit if we're going to make progress on this other thing.
I'm thinking based on that there's this like really important difference that gets confused so readily between macro and micro models of the world, right? So like the macro, well, and what we tend to focus on, especially in our line of work, is the micro, because we're working one-on-one generally with students. And the hardest thing I've done in my teaching career is figure out how to teach to a group as effectively as I teach to individuals, right?
It's a tall order.
It is a tall order, and frankly, and this is a whole other conversation, it can't be done as well. It can't be done on the group level as effectively moment to moment as it can one-on-one. And that's just sort of like common sense in a way, because with the individual, you just meet their immediate needs, so long as you recognize their immediate needs and then help them to develop and kind of remedy those.
I want to bookmark that idea, because I want to debate that in a certain context, but not in a way that
that'd be fun.
Yeah.
I remember we got a note from one of your friends, a really great note about we should disagree more. Which is good. You know what I mean? Like, I love that note. Rather than just like high-fiving each other all the way throughout the podcast. So boom. So the micro is the, like, each one of us is a snowflake, right? The
Okay.
macro model is together we make a snowdrift, you know? And I think that the point I want to make is that the confusion between the two is fraught. Because I think that sometimes the people who critique micro decisions about identity, like, for example, transitioning, but not exclusive to that at all, um, criticize it on a sort of macro level, which is to say, like, this is bad for society or something like that. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I do think that it's possible to focus too much on either the micro or the macro model, you know,
Well,
and
hang
we
on a
ought to,
second.
like, yeah,
I was going to ask you for an example, but you've
yeah,
given one, but I want to make sure that I understand it. So you're
yeah.
talking about, for example, decisions I can make that are that are the right decision for me, but that create a trend that may not be good for everyone writ large.
Yes. So, like, here's another example, completely separate from transition, which I think is important because, like, I'm all about transition. I think it's really interesting. I've spent plenty of time thinking about it, as you might guess. But it's, if you can believe it, it's not the only thing going on in the world. Um, um, so take the student who wants to major in philosophy, right? Um, the macro critique of that is the world doesn't need more philosophers. You know,
Okay.
what are you going to do with that? Then there's, like, the macro response to that, which is basically, yeah, but you're learning critical thinking skills and writing skills, and all of these things are going to serve you in your, whatever career path you choose going forward.
That
The
sounds micro to me,
micro,
but okay.
it's a little bit micro, but here's an even more micro example. I like it. I like philosophy and I want to
Oh.
study it. And it makes me feel, like a whole person, I met
Hmm.
this person recently in October, who was saying that, like, their peers regard them as like an airhead, like a space case, like always, thinking in these grandiose terms that were very beautiful. It's so loving. This person has, like, the most loving heart, outwardly just, like, thumping towards the world, so beautiful. And got this critique from other people that, like, oh, you shouldn't be like that because now you're, like, so much in, like, disagreement with the way the rest of us are, working. um
Weird.
and
All
and
right.
my response to that, and I know, and that this person had, like, taken it on sort of personally, that was like a, that critique was important. And it's like, why does it need to be important, to you? Is it important to you? How do you like yourself? you know if you like yourself, what does it matter what they think? That label, and in a way, interestingly, labels are macro. Okay, so, like, as soon as we need to, like, assign categories
Oh,
to
that's interesting.
people, to identities, right? It's
Yeah.
so that the group as a whole, the tribe, the flock, the pack, can understand us easily,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And it's like, I rebel against that, you know? Um, I'm not alone in rebelling against that, but there are preferences from the rest of people in society for
Hmm.
easy understanding, easy categorization, because everyone wants to move through the world in a simpler and easier way. Okay.
We want
So,
to reduce friction on ourselves. Sure, that makes sense.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. And so, coming back to your point about development and basically, like, um, you're talking about your own kind of levels of, growth and maturity and experience and wisdom and knowledge and learning. The um, we I believe that we should value the challenges that come into our lives that cause us to rethink how we see the world. Do we need to do that in every second of every day? Do we need to be, like, re-challenged and reoriented every single day? No. But the new challenges cause us to develop a flexibility within ourselves, which allows for understanding, which allows for empathy
The
and makes the world
analogy
a
that,
better place. Yeah.
oh yeah, for sure. The analogy that comes to mind is driving a car. When you're driving a car, 100% of your attention isn't, particularly on a highway, isn't on driving the car, right? You're you're listening to the radio, and so it's not like you're, looking in the back seat or whatever. Like there is a certain minimum attention level, right? But like, it's not like you're spending every second fine tuning the steering. It's like, every however long, second and a half or whatever it is, you kind of nudge it a little bit to stay on the road. And if you didn't have those constant little nudges, you'd run way off into the weeds, and that would be bad. But neither do you need to like have a death grip on the wheel. It's just like, okay, I have to pay enough attention to keep steering. And that feels like what you're talking about. Like it doesn't need to take over your entire everything, but you got to have a little bit of attention on it every so often so that you keep steering, stay on the road.
That's a perfect example. I mean, that's a great model. Yeah, I mean, and there is like a flexibility there where sometimes we're kind of like really anxious and tense and gripping, on the wheel. And that's actually not a very good way to drive. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
when you
exactly.
have that tension, like you sort of like, you overcorrect and all this stuff. And it's, it's not the best way. And then there's the person who's like, has their phone down. Like you're saying, you can't look backwards. You know what I mean? If you look backwards, you will crash. But you can. I don't do this. I try not to do this.
Let's just say change the station on the radio instead of text a friend, because my gosh.
One can say.
Okay, now we're wandering into trouble.
Look up where the movie theater is,
Preferably with voice control.
Yeah, exactly. Real quick aside, I have this app from my insurance company that like is now like tracking my driving, and that's fine.
You told me about this.
Right,
it's watching you drive and adjusting your rates in effect.
Exactly. I think I got a 13% discount, which I was pleased. Any discount made me happy.
Yeah, for sure. I find it more creepy than fascinating and compelling, but like reasonable people could disagree. I mean, like 13%, like it's real money,
If I had I not gotten the discount, I would have turned that off immediately.
Of course.
But my beef with it is that my car has like, it automatically syncs to Bluetooth as soon as I sit down, and there's voice control and Apple CarPlay, which I love. And I literally was not going to buy a car without Apple CarPlay, non-negotiable. And I will do some voice commands, and I'll hop in my car and I'll send 5 or 6 text messages. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And it's very, very easy, and my eyes are on the road. And the stupid app criticizes me for like using my phone. It's like, I'm not, it's like, you don't understand.
I'm using my voice. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that's my little beef.
That's interesting. I want to get back to the macro micro thing, because I think that rather than being like a single axis, there's actually 2 axes here, and we're calling them both, like we're conflating 2 axes somehow. Because when you were talking about the macro micro thing, who needs another philosopher, right? The world doesn't need another philosopher. I agree that that's macro. I like to do it. I agree that that's micro. But doing it, and I'm going to get writing skills, and I'm going to learn critical thinking, to me, that's micro, but it's different from I like to do it in an important way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, to me, that's social versus economic, right? Social is I like to do it. Community, like human, whatever. Economic entity, I'm going to get writing skills and critical thinking skills and so on, right? And the reason I'm bringing this up is I have another macro micro example that I think is a little bit more contentious.
Great.
Which is, I'm 17. I want to apply to name college. It's a micro decision that's in my best interest. But I was just reading a review of a recent book published that's, one of many, making the argument that the current system of having a few apex schools that all 17-year-olds are trying to get into is not a result of social economic inequality, but is in fact a causative factor. a significant causative factor of, for example, income inequality and so on. So that seems to me like if you accept that thesis, then we're talking about a great example of micro. It's in my best interest to strive as hard as I can and get into the best school. Macro, that's not a game we should be playing as a culture. You know, and that tension is
yeah.
really,
Can you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I mean, okay, so two thoughts, because this is so freaking important. You know, I mean, this is just absolutely right on the button with what we do. You know, what we've been doing for years. Yeah. I have an interesting relationship with my like education, you know, background. My cousin asked me, you know, she's like, "Where did you go to school again?" I was like, "I went to Princeton." She's like, "Why?"
Why?
And yeah.
And now I really want to know about the context of that why question, because that could mean 100 different things depending on where she's coming from, right?
Yeah. And she is not someone who I think came from a specifically academically oriented perspective. You know what I mean? I think that she was always like, you know, she's very bright, and she was, I think, probably getting through, you know, surviving school, and was always going to survive it, but was never there with the intention, like the purpose of thriving. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? Like, just because I found like a very comfortable home there, it doesn't mean that like everyone should.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you know, my answer to the question, when I'm really being honest, is like social improvement. You know, like that's there is a difference. There's a difference between going there and going to the University of Minnesota, which is where probably 40% of my high school class went. You know, if you're in Minneapolis and you went to the University of Minnesota, great. You know, you have a college degree. Everyone knows the Gophers, et cetera. You know, it's not quite the same as McAllister or Carleton, you know, but it's you know, highly regarded. And Princeton's regarded differently, you know, by other people, right? It's not about the self, you know. It's not really, let's be honest, at least for me, it wasn't necessarily about the quality of education. It was about the quality of peers. It was about being around like, you know, this like selected group of, you know, colleagues in terms of the faculty and the students. But they were for reasons, I went there for reasons outside of me, for sure. No doubt about it.
Yeah, I can tell a story that there were particular things that I was planning to get at my college, you know, the college delivered on. That would be disingenuous. It would be more authentic for me to say, after I got there, I discovered some things that spoke to me. But yeah, no, the whole decision process was completely externally driven in my case. I didn't have the kind of, I mean, forget self-awareness. I didn't have a sufficient sort of awareness of the world outside myself either, right? To say, oh, right, there's, you know, there are, this is going to be a consequential decision for me in part because of the frameworks I'm going to take on as I mingle with people who have a particular kind of focus. Right. Yeah, I'm going to go to a place where people are going to tend to be more directed, or going to tend to be more systems thinkers, right? School of Engineers, that kind of thing. You know, there's just a ton of different ways. And I wasn't really even thinking about the ways in which that might be significant to me or not. Like, thankfully, it worked out okay, in part because, you know, the system is trying to grab relatively, as I like to say, bright lights and narrow beams of people, right? Which a description I fit pretty well. Right.
Wow. Yeah, I've seen narrower beams than you, Wes. Much
I take that as a very strong compliment. Thank you.
Oh no, I mean it as one. Yeah. Compared to the average MIT student, I think you have a breadth of interests and skills.
Well, I appreciate that. And one of the things that's always been interesting to me is watch my alumni group be into all these different things. Now, granted, the things that they tend to be into do cluster, right, in certain regions. But it really does kind of support this thesis of like, yeah, we keep learning. Maybe not all my peers, but I know some folks, who went through that same college experience, who are just constantly reinventing things or processes or companies, in rare examples themselves, but the creativity may get focused in particular directions, but there's no shortage of creativity there.
Yeah. So to come back to the point you were making as we started talking about this, you were saying that basically the hierarchy, the sort of like because you go to a college. I mean, there is no answer to this question. Why do you go to a college? There are many answers you can give, and they all probably have some degree of accuracy or correctness or whatever. But it really is up to the individual in terms of what they believe. But you might go to a college because they cater to the skills that you have, that you're interested in developing. You know what I mean? Like, I want to be an engineer. I want to be a systems thinker. I want to, think about thinking. At Princeton, I think it's like, I don't know exactly how to label it, but I want, yeah.
I imagine Princeton from the outside to be like, we're the folks who want to go off and be masters of the universe. So let's go meet the other people who are going to be in charge. I mean,
there's some of that for sure. That wasn't my circle.
But I know that you had run-ins with some of those folks. We've talked about some of your classmates in the past, who have gone on to become quite powerful.
Oh yeah, and who arrived at school already quite powerful, and like, I don't know, it just never clicked. What can I say?
Yeah.
But it's funny. There's a little bit of like a pure intellectualism there. You know what I mean? Just a like, we are thinking because thinking is beautiful. And we'll continue to do that. I mean, all of my friends, they're all academics, like all of them. Some of them are lawyers. A couple of them are lawyers.
Yeah. Which is kind of corporate academia, perhaps. I mean, the
exactly.
overlap is, yeah.
So tell me more about the sort of like causative effect of the hierarchy model, right? So it's like there's the skill model or the interest model, and then there's and this is the honest answer to my question, to my cousin's question. I went to Princeton because it was the best college I got into.
Yeah, best, right there
best by U.S. News and World.
I was going to say thank you to U.S. News for for being so incredibly reductive in your exactly. I think a lot of us had that same feeling, right? And to me, it's not macro versus micro, it's social versus economic, right? There have been decisions I've made in my life where it's like, okay, this is the way I'm going to set myself up to not have to worry about certain monetary pressures that I've been close enough to that I know I want to avoid them, right?
Yeah.
And there have been decisions I've made where it's like, this is a move towards a warmer community that I can feel really good about contributing to. But I gotta say, when it comes to like advice being thrown at one over the course of one's life, at least in my case, a lot more of it was focused on the former than the latter. Like, how do you live a good life? That's a question that you answer after you make sure you are going to have a roof over your head. That's the culture I grew up in, is that kind of thinking. Now, having married a Berkeley native, I know that not all people grow up with that particular hierarchy, right? But I know that in my, again, socially conservative sort of upbringing, there was just such an incredible importance placed on setting yourself up for future, not even comfort, avoiding future crisis. I mean, to me, it really read as a fear-based kind of thing, right?
Right.
And the older I get, the more it's like, well, but what are we really chasing here? We're chasing happiness, and happiness doesn't come from those things. And I know, right? There are listeners who are like, well, yeah, if you're not worried about those financial issues, then you can afford to focus on happiness. And they're not wrong. I tell you what, rather than simplifying the discussion, I'll make it even more complicated for a minute. Can
I? Yeah, of course. I mean, isn't that the whole point of our conversations?
God, I hope so.
And then I think it's like, I'm kind of like mapping it out in my head visually, where basically we, start from like one little point, go in, start like kind of exploring strains, and then like see if we can braid them up towards the end.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is the last one that I'm gonna throw in there. So as we've discussed before, I don't know the degree you want to get into this, but you're a writer. I don't want to say author because
True.
That seems to pigeonhole you a bit, but you're a writer.
Yeah, and author's kind of weird. Yeah, I am a writer for sure.
I've read some of your work, and like I'd put a capital W on it. Like it's not you're not messing around. Like I read it, and it's like, yeah, okay, I can give this a critique that I would give to a professional work of writing because it's at that level. And as I think we've talked about, I'm doing this side project with two buddies of mine who are in very intense creative fields, where we're creating this science fiction world, as writers.
Oh yeah.
And yeah. And one of the things that's been coming up in our discussions of this thing, which I'll plug very quickly. I'll just mention it's Wisteria. Wisteria.ai is where you can go to learn more about this thing. Anyway, one of the conversations that's come up is, what does AI portend, right, in the near future for creative fields and all this kind of good stuff? Because of course we're trying to project forward into a world we're creating that's set 20 or 30 years in the future. It's like, well, how is AI going to develop? But the more we've gotten into how does this fit into our science fiction world, the more it's been like, actually, hang on a second, let's talk about what it means for us as creative individuals over the next 5 or 10 years, right? The people I'm talking to are like a storyboard artist and a professional illustrator. And they're looking at some of the work that AI has done recently, and they're saying, well, curation continues to be important. We don't know how long that'll be, but the ability to quickly sketch a thing, like that skill is going to go away as a valuable human activity. And
Wes, can we, go ahead.
Well, please. The way I was going to try and tie it together is that the illustrator in particular is saying, well, like clearly we have to decouple what you do all day from your ability to survive economically. And I'm like, well, that isn't clear to me, but it seems pretty clear to him, because like from his perspective, as I understand it, it's like very soon the vast majority of artists will need to be creating art for the sake of their own enjoyment, because there's not going to be any other motive force behind art. Right. And it's like, whoa, that's a pretty strong statement. But it's like, well, that gets into the whole economic versus social, like, where's your focus going to be when there's no longer a ladder to climb?
Okay, so good Lord. I mean, this is so wonderful. It's so rich. There's so much here. Because I've been playing around with this Chat GPT app.
Oh, you have? Ooh, sure. Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. It does this. It does the same thing as what's the there's Lensa for like people's profile photos or whatever, but there's another Dolly, exactly.
Yeah, Chat GPT is to writing what Dolly is to images, give or take.
Yeah, totally. And it's a little it's at times can be very convenient. Oh my God.
Oh, sure.
What I mean? If I were to write another ACT or SAT book, like that's where I'd start in terms of
really?
not in terms of the lessons, definitely not in terms of the lessons, because and there's that might be an interesting topic. But in terms of reading comprehension passages, 100%. I would have
writing texts for you to analyze. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, all right, that makes sense.
Well organized.
Right.
Appropriate coherent vocabulary, coherent, right on topic. Anyway, I think we should do a conversation about automation. Like, I think we should do a whole episode on that. Basically, like the sort of like the future model of basically how are we going to live with this? It's very beautiful and it's very, impactful. And what's the world going to look like with that as a fundamental part of what we have to rely on?
Right. That's what the Wisteria team is starting to grapple with. And as we started opening that
cool.
box, it was like, oh, wait a minute. Like this, you know, there are
the implications are massive.
Right.
You know,
we could predict black and white to color TV. We could predict phones getting smaller. But like you get into this stuff and it's like, oh, wait a minute. Yeah.
Let's go nuts on automation, and I'll dig in on Chat GPT, you know, and I'll get into like some really specific examples of like, you know, maybe I'll even bring you samples and basically say like, I wrote one of these and Chat GPT wrote the other one, and see if you can figure out which one's which, you know?
Well, and I imagine that I'll have some trouble with that. And then the natural question that comes up is, okay, well, what does that mean for you or for us? What does it mean on a micro level? What does it mean on a macro level? Because on a micro level, it's, oh, I can no longer have a career, you know, in certain kinds of writing, right? Or at the very least, I need to become a hybrid writer where, as you were just suggesting, I'm going to use Chat GPT to generate certain text, which I'm then going to curate or edit or contextualize in some way, right?
So, okay, so gosh, I mean, that's such the reason I love that topic, and I want to continue to talk about it now. But I think it's so rich that I think I think we should go, you know what I mean? Like, let's do another one of these like next week and just
happy to
absolutely go to town. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I was going to bring us back to the micro macro thing. Right.
Yeah.
So totally. The business of how am I going to survive as a writer? All right. That's a micro topic. The one that's much harder is what macro implications are there? Right. What are the macro implications? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Amazing. Save that for next week.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's such a good one. But here's to loop this back, because this is related to where we're taking off from, which is basically, again, the purpose of higher education. Right. Right. And like, you know, why do we go where we go? Why do we study what we study? Right. Something that I've been doing, that I'm just realizing now, like literally for the first time after 20 freaking years of doing this full time and independently. Oh my God, 20 years. 2 decades.
Yeah. Talk to me about Atlanta there, Junior.
Oh my God.
You young thing.
I'm older than I look. So what I've been doing as a major part of my professional life is helping students from the student side.
Okay.
Helping them extract their personal interests and like skills and cherishing those things, and from the parent/society side, connecting those to like useful and helpful avenues for the rest of society. Do you know what I mean?
Which deepens their authentic connection to the culture, because now it comes from a real place instead of an artificial place. And sometimes, often in many ways, right, adolescents feel like, oh, I have to become this thing I'm not in order to fit into this culture. And I think you're pointing out that like, well, no, like you need to take some authentic pieces and find connection points.
I'm really concerned that I'm a fraud, because I'm a person who was giving all that advice for so many years, and meanwhile was like having to like, I've gone through 2 major coming out periods of my life, you know, first as a gay man.
Oh, I see.
You know, and later on as a transgender woman. And like, who am I to tell someone else like, you ought to do this in order to get along with society? And actually, no, I know the answer to that question, because the answer to that question is, I'm a freaking expert at it. I'm freaking fantastic at sacrificing your own specific needs in order to match up well with the needs of the people around you.
Well said. And I think that that's, you and I both know that the surest path to success goes through many failures. You have to do it wrong a bunch of times if you want to do it right. So when you say that you're a fraud, the way I would adjust that is to say, yeah, you've failed in important ways in finding a connection between your authentic self and the culture. And that makes you more qualified to speak on that kind of success. You know, the success that you're currently experiencing is a result of multiple failures. You know, how much better is that than the people who like find the failure mode they can tolerate and just stick with it?
True. You're right. And if that's the model, if the model is failure, you know, failure until success, and then more failure, and then more success, and you know, then I'm doing freaking fantastic. I'm the Thomas Edison, you know, I'm the Thomas Edison of like identity rebuilding.
Well, and I mean, I think that's part of why your transition as a friend of mine has been so sort of surprisingly nothing burger, because it's been a growth mindset thing. And I realized that I had the preconception on some level that growth mindset didn't apply to certain areas of life. And like, I say that out loud and I'm like, that doesn't sound like something I would think, but clearly there's a piece of my brain that was kind of not really seeing the light on that one. And now that it's unfolded in front of me, it's like, oh, no, yeah, growth mindset is universal. Like, you know, it applies to this stuff just as well.
No doubt. Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So, I feel like there's another question we had in there that we didn't get to answering yet. I mean,
just the one.
Yeah. Wait, which one?
I have no idea. I feel like there's so many.
Yeah, just the one. Yeah. We've solved all the rest of them. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If you've tuned in for answers, I have some bad news for you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. How long do you have?
Yeah, exactly. We've asked some questions though. There's something there. No, do you remember what specific thing grabbed your attention as it went by?
I
you want to come back to?
Sure don't.
I sure don't. All right,
fair enough. What do you think though is, I will say, what do you think is the, do you think that the service I've offered in helping students connect their individual passions to, you know, a college match, and then hopefully eventually a successful career, is that a service? You know what I mean? Is that like,
yes. No, I believe strongly that it is, but not for the reasons you would think.
Okay. Hit it.
The fact is that, you know, we're all, you know, primates, right? Deep down, right? And we're all toddlers deep down. And because we are toddlers, because we are primates, because we have this, you know, sort of like limbic emotional whatever, there's a part of us that wants the universe to revolve around us, that thinks the universe revolves around us, that behaves as though the universe has us at its center. And part of the work of growing up is accepting that other reasonable points of view exist besides I personally am at the center of the universe, and figuring out ways to sort of, you know, get along with others, you know, in ways that are mutually beneficial, right? Like we are a tribal, cultural, you know, collective species. And so from my perspective, if, and I'm not saying this is true, but if I take your negative view and I say, listen, the way you've connected stuff up is just help these folks connect stuff up is messed up, and you're part of the problem, Amie, you know, that kind of thing. That doesn't ring true for me, because even if you have helped people make that connection in a flawed or imperfect way, the fact remains that making those connections is the work of humans in human culture, right? And again, if you do it wrong the first time, and maybe wrong the second time, and maybe wrong the third time, that just increases your chance of success on the 4th or 14th times. Engaging in that process. It's like the old saw, right? Plans aren't worth the paper they're printed on, but planning, the work of planning, is invaluable. And that's the model I would bring to this work. We may be doing it in an imperfect way, but we're getting people to look at this work and to examine this work and to engage in this work. And this work is important independent of whether you get it right the first time.
Yeah, yeah. Gosh, that's wonderful. I Yeah. It's funny. It's weird to be like on a podcast and also like be like such a satisfied audience member of said podcast. Like what wisdom you just brought in. Thank you. Like that's that's beautiful. Um, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Uh,
I'm glad everyone's
it's
treating
funny.
you.
I Oh yeah. I've been writing music recently, which is really fun and really satisfying, and got me in not huge trouble, but like pretty big trouble with my family over Christmas. I wrote a,
Oh,
I wrote a little Christmas song. I shouldn't even say that on the podcast.
I'm going to
Anyway,
go out on a limb and assume that this song had to do with your transition in some thematic way.
uh-huh. Yeah,
Yes. All right. So
yeah.
I can infer the sorts of trouble you might have gotten into. I hope that your conservative uncle in Idaho or whatever, didn't completely disown you or whatever.
If I had a conservative uncle and I were disowned by that person, that'd be fine.
Oh, yeah, I hear you.
But no one, here's I don't know. As far as that goes, like I'm people are once you actually have a conversation with them are so kind and so like other than like sociopaths, like they're like really understanding and loving and want to get along, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? So politics are can be a distraction, but no,
for sure.
to the songwriting thing, it takes time and it takes failure and it takes uh repeated kind of visits and passes to like get to the version that you're like, this is clean, this I like, this is
Yeah,
telling the story that I want to tell,
right.
in with like maximum efficiency,
Yeah,
um the thing I've been thinking about in terms of like the planning versus the plans is I have these notes from the process of writing the song and from recording it and all this stuff. And I was debating the other day. I was like, do I keep this? Do I keep this or do I throw this away? You know what I mean? And for the most part, I keep my writing notes and I have like a file that's writing notes. I don't ever look at it, and sometimes I go back and I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why that idea appealed to me in 2003. But they're not especially useful. I think that they're kind of like momentum, like markers. You know what I mean? It's
yeah,
almost like if suppose you were running a marathon, which is like its own little fraught analogy, but suppose like the goal, like suppose you were running a marathon, um, it would be like taking a photo at like, 10K or 20K or whatever. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you did do that. You know what I mean? Kind of who gives a shit? You know what I mean? Like
mm-hmm.
this is just part of the bigger process. But yeah, I had that debate, and I I ended up keeping some of them and throwing some of them away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yep. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And it's so easy to say, oh gosh, this was such a messy process, but it's like, hey, sister, welcome to life. It's a messy process.
Yeah, the sausage factory thing, you know what I mean? It's like,
Mhm.
it's a lot more pleasant to just like be on the dining side of the restaurant rather than the sausage making side. You know what I mean? Like
Right. There's a
have
reason
sausage
there's
on
a
your
wall
pizza
there. Yeah.
and stop asking questions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, no, that's really true. And it reflects back on us as people making our way through life and as professionals helping others make their way through particular academic, and
Mm,
career-based hurdles. Yeah, I think, well, here's the button for the conversation from my point of view, right?
yeah.
I have a lot of colleagues who recognize that the work we do is fraught in the sense that it's extremely economically valuable on a micro level, and it has many social implications, some of which can be tied to bad outcomes. Like, you can make the argument that these schools are causing trouble. Yeah, you can also make the opposite argument that, like, American colleges remain an incredibly powerful source of innovation and connection and value creation. I'm not I'm not the guy to tell you which of those is right. I don't know, right? But one of the things that I really appreciate about you and about our conversations is that we're acknowledging we don't know, we're talking about it, we're trying to dig for truth. And I have so many colleagues who recognize on some intuitive level that's true and don't want to engage with it, right? Or who've pre-decided what the answer is and are acting accordingly, which I actually have some respect for. It's like, okay, just go forward and then you'll learn more, as long as you're keeping your eyes open as you go in that direction, right? As long as you're willing to discover that there's some other direction you want to be going in. But this conversation is not important to us economically, it's important to us socially. It's like, okay, what am I doing in my community? How am I contributing or not? And how can I improve that?
So, it's funny, we've been circling around it, but we are definitely honing in on the theme of this episode, which is basically like the social world, right, revolving around the individual and the connection between the individual and the social, which is so relevant, which is so important to my transition. You know what I mean? Like that is like that connection is where the transition happens. You know what I mean? Because I've been the same person my entire life. That's a fact. And and just like a quick aside, if you ask me, like, when did I become trans, right? The answer is,
let me guess, age 4 or something like that, right?
Kind of, but honestly, when the doctor held me up and said, "It's a boy," that's the moment. That's it. You know what I mean? It's like that. I've been the person I've been the whole dang time.
Right.
I had a friend one time, well-educated, smart friend, who, this is back when I was living as a gay man, thought that like being gay was a choice. And I was like, well, when did you choose to be straight? And he's like, well, I didn't really. It's like, it's like these things are, I believe, sort of central to identity. But the decision to, come out and be sort of, expressive of that, this like fundamental part of myself, is the decision to go from, I'm keeping this inside of me, right? Which is where it lived for, 42 years, and say, I'm now showing this outwardly, and I'm inviting you all to not deal with it with me, but to see me through that sort of like, filter, that, you know what I mean? Like to reinterpret sort of who I am. And I don't know, I think that's really important. And I think that is fundamental to the work that I've done for my entire career, is navigate and negotiate the connection between the individual and the social.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where our next conversation goes, because I think it's going to touch on a lot of those issues as we framed it.
It's beautiful to have another excellent conversation with you, and we should do the thing that we always forget to do.
Oh, what's that?
Is like properly plug our businesses.
Oh, right. Yes. So Amie works at tutorted.com.
That's right.
Is it still the same website at this time?
Still the same website, and what's neat is that when you go there now, it's like, "Hi, I'm Amie." You know what I mean?
Oh, I haven't seen the new site. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's been up for maybe 2 weeks tops. Yeah, and I it's like I changed the site. I haven't really let everybody know that I changed the site.
Got it. Yeah. So I should continue to say that Amie and her colleagues at Tutor Ted are not just thoughtful, but it must be said, extremely successful at helping students do very well on those terribly important SAT and ACT tests that are a part of moving through that particular neck of the system on which so much attention is focused these days. And I think there's a lot of value in taking the uncertainty out of that very stressful juncture in a student's life.
Before I introduce you, which I'm so excited to do, and plug you, I have 2 thoughts.
Okay.
One is that standardized testing is absolutely like the clearest like line between the individual expressing as an individual and the social structure demanding that you be a certain way. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, but now let's put you on the bell curve, you know?
Oh, yeah.
So that has been my line of work.
Yeah.
The other thought I had back to what we were saying about the, you know, getting into college as sort of a competitive, hierarchical, you know, social strata thing is, I had this student recently who got into Brown and absolutely should have gotten into Brown and is like a, you know, a beautiful, wonderful human being that we all should be so happy that we have.
Do you know, I have never met a jerk from Brown, not once.
Interesting.
I've met someone.
I met a weirdo from Brown before.
Really?
Okay.
Everyone I've met from Brown has been like fascinating.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Most of the students that I've sent to Brown have been effing fabulous. I mean, like, it's just wonderful people. And I'm still friends with all of them, you know.
Yeah,
I was friends with them. I was friends with them when they were, you know, 16 years old. Yeah. And I'm friends with them now that they're like 35, you know.
That's cool.
God, he's 35. That's crazy. He's so much older now than I was then. You know, it's so
right.
Weird.
Yeah, you know, I hear you, believe me.
This student who I was working with, it's like, you know, it's fair to say is privileged, you know, has like, you know, just goes to a fancy private school in an very expensive city in the most expensive neighborhood. And all of those things are like, you know, about social strata. The skills that that person had to develop in order to get into Brown were at a level, it had to be developed to a really high level in order to get in.
Because privilege wasn't enough, is that what you're saying?
Because privilege wasn't enough. And so like the competitive aspect of elite college admissions forced her to develop herself.
Yeah.
You know, she's a better, more interesting thinker because of her, because of the social hierarchy of college admissions.
It's hard to argue with that. Yeah.
Yeah. This person over here, this one I'm looking at here, that's Wes Carroll, who's on the web at wescarroll.com. There are 2 R's and 2 L's in Carroll. And Wes is just a really outstanding thinker, which you already know. If you've gotten this far in the podcast, you definitely know that. He's someone that I just responded to from the beginning of our sort of connection in an elevator in San Francisco. And I think Wes specializes in a way in, like, if you were to pick a curricular focus, you'd say Wes is an outstanding mathematician, right? But I would say beyond that, an outstanding problem solver.
Thank you.
And analytical and creative thinker, you know, and those 2 things I think are like hand in hand. And there are good analytical thinkers and there are good creative thinkers. And it's very rare to see someone who is both. So yeah, Wes is just a special mind and an empath. And you know, if I had kids and if I had the money, I would definitely send them to Wes.
That's very kind, Amie. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's talk about automation next time. Y'all come back and let's continue the excellent.
Yeah, it sounds like a big winner. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks as always for a lovely conversation. I will see you next time.
Pleasure.
Thanks for hanging with us. Click subscribe, ring the bell, tell a friend, leave a comment. You know the drill.